Hi, welcome to Pembrokeshire. I'm Olly Coe, a stonemason specialising in the care and repair of historic buildings. And I've been commissioned by the Pembrokeshire Town Walls Trust to make a couple of instructional videos. The first one is going to be looking at repair techniques to existing stones, which is mortar repairs and indent repairs. So the overriding philosophy really of working with historic buildings is to retain as much of the historic fabric as possible, and these processes allow us to retain stones which have perhaps suffered some loss or decay but are otherwise functional and still structurally performing. And then later on we'll be looking in a second video at some maintenance and repair consolidation to solid built stone walls, so earth and lime mortar built walls. Okay, so mortar repairs first. We're looking here at part of a decorated panel from a building in Pembrokeshire. A lot of the detail is salvageable, so it's quite a nice piece of work. We're not going to replace that stone. There's plenty of life left in it, but it has lost a certain amount of definition and detail. And so we'll give that a little clean up. I've already largely cleaned up the loose material, but we'll brush that back and remove any loose and friable material that's still there. What we don't want to do is build up a mortar repair on dusty or loose material, because that would simply just fall off at some point. So here we can see we've lost a lobe of one or two leaves here, and I think we can build those up using mortar quite satisfactorily. So having cleaned back dust and loose material, we need to key the surface to be repaired in, and form an edge to where the repair will form. What we don't want is little feather edges of mortar. They're not going to last. We need a certain amount of depth to it, so I'm just going to, using a small letter cutting chisel and a dummy there, just key the edges so that the mortar will be a reasonable depth at the edge of the repair, and also just get rid of any remaining loose material and key that back surface in to receive a repair. When we're building up larger areas of mortar repair, we'd often use an armature in the repair, and this can be either stainless steel wire in this case, or fine threaded bar, or ceramic armature to help reinforce that mortar repair and hold it in place and hopefully keep it there for longer term. On this example here, obviously a straightforward moulded piece of bath stone. You can see that I've been cutting out for the edge of the repairs previously, and I've pre-drilled this to receive a couple of stainless steel armatures. They're going to help me when it comes to rebuilding that moulding in mortar. Now these can be bent and drilled, fitted into place, either with just a tight fitting hole and run in with a bit of lime putty. Some people would like to use polyester resin. Don't think there's any particular need to do that if it's tight fitting and wants to hold itself in place anyway. So the other thing that we might use in this situation is wire, stainless steel wire, as I've mentioned, and that can be twisted and fitted into a range of holes and then shaped to sort of loosely follow the profile that you're trying to build up. Obviously we don't want to see any of that once we build up the mortar repair, so that should be inside the mortar repair and probably in the first layer. A bigger repair like this we would build up with 2 layers of mortar, and we want that first one to cure and to be hardened up before we apply a top coat, as it were. Going back to the leaf panel, I'm going to drill in a couple of holes to make a wire, stainless steel wire armature for this leaf. Now it's important to use sharp drill bits for this work, and also not to use a hammer drill. Let's not forget we're looking to repair this stone, so we don't want to hammer drill into it and cause further damage. So checking the drill is not on a hammer drill, just gently drilling into that surface to create a socket for the wire. Don't need an awful lot there. Now again, this could be fixed in with a little pure lime putty, wet it up and run into those joints, which we'll do in a minute when we've got the mortar mixed up and ready for the repair. It's important to say, of course, all of this will need wetting down thoroughly before we attempt any mortar repair, otherwise it's just going to suck the life out of the lime mortar and dry it far too quickly. So we'll give this a good wetting down before we start that process. Next is mixing up the repair mortar itself. Right, we're ready to mix up our repair mortar. This is Bath stone, a limestone, relatively soft, and as you can see, it's a sort of light buff colour. Many of you will be familiar with Bath stone. It's used extensively around Britain, and obviously a lot more in the southwest. We're going to use a proportion of Bath stone dust, which we've salvaged and sieved from the banker shop, in this mortar to help match texture and colour. Mortars made with lime and dust on its own tend to crack a little bit, so we're going to add a little bit of strength to that, a bit more of a granular structure to the mortar by adding a sand. So I'm going to use this is a pit sand, not particularly coarse, but it's quite well graded. It's got some nice little particulates in it, and that's probably going to be coarse enough for these kind of repairs. If we were building up, as in maybe this case, a little bit deeper, I'd probably put a base coat of a coarser mix, and then top coat with this mix. So that's one for the sand there. I'm going to add a similar quantity, same quantity of a fine sand. This is actually a kiln dried sand, so it pours evenly. I'm just using this because I found it to be a nice colour texture match for finished Bath stone previously. And the Bath stone dust itself. So that's the Bath stone dust. That's a sieved through, medium sieve. There are some little chunks and grits of Bath stone in there as well. We don't want just a very, very fine dust. So we're going to use one of those. while you mix those up. I'm using my hands here, but you'll notice I've got gloves on. And we're going to add 1 quicklime. Now, when using lime of any variety, and when mixing particularly, it's essential to have a pair of safety glasses on. It's very caustic, and if you get it in your eye, it's going to do damage. It's sore. And the quicklime particularly will react with the water in your eye and cause more problems. If we're doing a big batch or mechanically mixing it, masks on, because it's going to give off a lot more dust. Just put a little bit of water in here now, get that process going. You can see the heat, the steam coming off that now as it's really starting to heat through. The quicklime reacting with the water and bonding, and what that does is it creates an initial stiffening effect for the mortar. So as that's being mixed, we'll add just a little bit more in to get it to a usable consistency. Hot mix mortars, lime mortars generally, we're obviously just touching on it here. It's a whole world in itself, and we will on a later video, I hope, cover more about mortars and their various uses. But for now, we'll concentrate on just this one repair mortar. Now the colour of that is, as you can see, a little bit darker than the colour of the dry stone surface. I think we're looking at trying to sort of match, and that's still quite hot, trying to match the colour of wet stone. It's close there. It's a little bit darker because of the inclusion of that darker sand, and that's the other reason that we use sands as well as the stone dust, because stone dust with the lime, which is usually white and will lighten the mortar, will take it to a sort of finished. This is too light, so you need to darken that up a bit. Right, I'll just keep kneading that a little bit as it's heating through. Just a quick point: when mixing using quicklime, so mixing with a hot mix, don't attempt to do it in a builder's bucket or a plastic bucket, because the reaction, the heat generated, will melt the bucket. That spike in temperature as the reaction takes place doesn't last terribly long, but it will melt your bucket in the meantime. So you could transfer this almost now into an ordinary bucket, and that would be fine. So it's peaked in temperature, and it's already starting to cool down to a usable consistency. And I'm just kneading this mortar together, pushing it together. The more you mix the mortar, the stickier it gets. And it's almost like using a dough, that you work it up to the consistency and the stickiness you require. Okay, so having mixed up our mortar, we're ready to prepare that surface and apply it. I'm going to give that a good wet down, because it's very dry at the moment, and it simply won't do the mortar any good at all to apply it onto a dry surface. It just drag all of the moisture out of that mortar, flash dry it, and the mortar will fail. The key with lime mortars is to let them cure over time, ideally several days, and not get dried out. So it needs to properly carbonate, and that happens slowly. and so we need to wet the substrate, and once we've finished doing the repairs, we need to keep them damped down, even covered, so that they don't dry out too quickly and don't crack, and it allows that time for that process to take place properly. Right, so having pre-wet that surface, we're going to prime those missing areas we're hoping to build up using a kind of watered down version of our mortar, like a kind of lime milk, and that's just feeding in to the open porous texture of that stone and forming an initial bond onto which we'll build our mortar. It essentially saves applying a mortar and not having a good contact, if you like, between those two surfaces. Remember the armature, the small stainless steel wire reinforcing. We're going to apply that now, and I'll run that in with, again, some of that slightly more liquid, slightly runnier mortar, so that we can bond that in around. Something to say on armatures. The bonding in, which may be done with lime, as I say, some people choose to use polyester resin. The problem with polyester resin is it's bonded in there, and the process is then not reversible. If in a few years' time, 10 years' time, this mortar repair, which is essentially a sacrificial repair, has weathered back, has decayed, and maybe even revealed the armature, it could be done again, or that armature could be taken out, which is why I choose not to bond it in with resin. But also a thought to which way up that goes in the building. This stone is that way up, and so I've drilled that armature in on a downward angle so that gravity will hold it in place and it's not going to fall out. So we'd probably build these up in layers of no more than about 10 mil. So this leaf here, we'd build up to that layer, encasing the armature, getting a good surface bond, and I would leave that to cure once I've formed a bit more, and we'd probably then go on to build up a top coat once that's cured off. And you might want to key in for the top coat when that's done. For the purposes of the video, I'm going to continue, always really key to be pressing that mortar down and into the surface of the stone to reinforce the bond. Not to be sort of dragging it away. We might pull that mortar away from the stone. And obviously, in the case of a moulded stone like this one here, there's a bit more guidance to the shape of the repair, and we can use straight edges or timbers, battens to help shape that profile as we're finishing a repair. And that's about it. So what we need to do next is look after this and stop it from drying too much. When you've got something like a complicated shape like these carved leaf work, it's sometimes useful to use cotton wool, dampened down and then applied to protect that surface. Otherwise you're going to be spraying over constantly and you might start washing the lime out of the mortar, so we don't want to be too aggressive with that. If I just build up this little section here, we'll cover that up ordinary cotton wool pads. Just split those down and give them a good soaking. And some clean water. And I'm just going to lay that over the top of that repair so that it wraps around and keeps that whole area relatively moist, so that I can go away and get on with something else. It can be wet down directly on to the cotton wool, and that will feed into the surface of the stone. You can use cotton sheet or even something like a kitchen roll for the same purposes. Larger areas of repair or render might be covered up with damp hessian. It's a little bit rougher material for this kind of repair.